So one of the things we're thinking about as we're waiting for golden hour down here on the beach is framing your subject when you're shooting portraits. It's such a small little move for you to make that's gonna make your photos look so much better by just having your subject, your friend, whomever you're shooting, move a little bit. You can see my friend Holiday standing, he's blocking that, I guess that's the south tower of the Golden Gate Bridge. Just having him take a half step to the left to be in between both the north and the south tower, that shot is gonna be composed so much better. Be aware of framing and where people are standing. You don't want that tower coming out of his head. That's not gonna look good. You don't want trees and poles and all kinds of stuff growing out of people. You wanna make sure that framing, that composition is done nicely.
Paying attention to your lines. What I mean by this is if you're shooting a building like this, you want to make sure that your lines are as level and straight as possible. This draws your viewer in and provides them with a symmetry that is just super satisfying. Here you can see my lines are a little off and now they are perfect. Here's another shot, they're just slightly off and now I'm squared off. And here's one more, the lines are just a titch off and now they're straight on. Do you see the difference?
The whole key lies very specifically in seeing it in the mind's eye, which we call visualization.
Take a look at Adams' famous photo of the Tetons and the Snake River taken in 1942. The contrast here is really incredible. And to get a better sense of it, let's pixelate the image. Look how Adams represents basically every zone in the system, all the way from Zone 0, full black, in the shadow of the mountains here, to Zone 10, in the light reflecting off the river. What's even more extraordinary is his ability to capture the highlight detail in the clouds and elsewhere in the river, and the shadow details in the trees that cover the bank.
Perhaps music is the most expressive of the arts. However, as a photographer, I believe that creative photography, when practiced in terms of its inherent qualities, may also reveal endless horizons of meaning.
Here, Adams had a vision of what he wanted his image to look like. He cites this as his first conscious use of the technique called visualization. And look at the difference it makes. The darkened sky charges the image with drama and intensity in contrast.
The thing that excites me is that within not too many years, we're going to have a entirely new medium of expression in the electronic image. And I know the potentials are there. I know it's going to be wonderful.
What is colour? If someone were to ask you that question, what would you say? How do you explain what magenta looks like?
It's a nice tree.
Or how turquoise feels? There's a number of things you could say to define what colour is. It's our psychological reaction to different wavelengths of visible light. It's how we visually perceive our reality. But what would I answer? It's my favourite aspect of visual storytelling. Since before we were even able to actualise sound in films, we've been obsessed with colour. Before filters in cameras existed, innovators like Edison and Méliès would hand tint their films. They would literally paint onto their film stock to enhance their images so they could become all the more wondrous. But it didn't take filmmakers too long to discover that colour was an essential component of storytelling. Colour soon became a way to symbolise the inner workings of characters. But once Technicolor developed their 3-strip colour technique, a brand new world of opportunity was open to us. Whether the tone is cold and hopeless, or gritty and dangerous, the colour serves that purpose. There are no set guidelines to say this is how you use colour. For example, red seems to be the colour that we have the strongest reaction to. But where one may use it as a depiction of hate and cruelty, another may use it to show passion and love. The same with green. A luscious green field gives us hope and shows fertility. But green locations also show the mundane and lifeless, and the green on a person tells us who the monster is. What's the purpose of colour? It sets the groundwork for the emotional state of the film. One of the best filmmakers at utilising colour schemes today is Wes Anderson. Look at Moonrise Kingdom. The use of greens, browns and yellows means that the colours don't greatly contrast one another, and so it's pleasing to look at. He used an analogous colour scheme because it's calming and it suits the film's nostalgic tone. Another common harmony you'll see is the complementary scheme. Colours on the opposite end of the wheel complement one another. so you'll often see red and green, blue and orange, or yellow and purple. Adding balance to the image means that nothing disrupts the flow of colour, and here we're seeing how colour affects the film's tone. If you change any of these elements, then you change the tone of the film. Change the tone, and you have a different movie. Again, going back to Wes Anderson, colour is often the context for his stories. In The Royal Tenenbaums, Gene Hackman does terrible things, but because of his pale pink clothing, we know not to take anything he does too seriously, as the colours render him silly. The same with the Grand Budapest Hotel. All you have to do is look at how colourful the images are to know that nothing here carries much emotional weight. So if colour can affect us on such an intrinsic level, surely it can be used to add context to the image. One of the most important things to note about colour is that the audience will notice that which doesn't fit in, hence why game design uses bold, saturated colours for important objects. But when you throw something in that doesn't fit the scheme, this creates discordance. Sometimes all this means is to have one saturated colour that doesn't quite fit in. This can give the audience's eyes a focus and a resting point, or intentionally draw the audience's eyes towards something. There's a reason behind every colour choice in a film. When watching a film that uses very specific colours, how do those colours make you feel, and how do they follow the characters? Why is it that the narrator's corporate life is in a dull green? Why is Schmidt constantly surrounded by blues? When you find the colour's subject, the rest of the film can be told through the colour alone. So yeah, we know that colour is often a psychological process, and that using it can create certain atmospheres. Creating a scheme around that colour can then emphasise that atmosphere. Whether it be the primary hue of a recurring colour scheme, or the repetition of specific colours throughout a film, single consistent colours in a story are used as associations. All this means is that we associate that colour to a certain subject or an idea. So let's say your character is associated with the colour purple. If we proceed to see purple in the future, we will know it's because that scene in some way is referencing the subject. Using colour schemes in clothes was essential in conveying the moral standings of characters in Breaking Bad. One of the best examples of character transitions comes in this scene. Having already transgressed over time into a more villainous state, our main character wears red, a much more nefarious colour. But just before he dives even further into his own evils, he removes his shirt to reveal a darker one. His visual presence represents his character arc. Something dark lies beneath the surface of Walt.
Who are you talking to right now?
Repetition of single colours in a scheme shows some kind of interrelation to an idea. If certain colours are recurrent throughout a story, try and find the subject it's related to. That's the association. If a colour has been associated to a subject, and that colour then shifts, it signifies a change in something. Transitions can be something as simple as a location, or be something more complex, like your character's state of mind. The subject of a colour association most of the time is a character. So how do you make that association? Clothing is one of the most common ways to do this, because characters will literally always be seen alongside the colour they wear. Colour's effect on us is a psychological anomaly, and we may not know why it affects us, but it does. It's how we know just by the colour of the lightsabers who's good and who's evil. So the next time you're looking at a colour scheme, think of the psychological ramifications of that colour. Find the association, the transitions, and the film may discover itself to you more than the words could. Roger Deakins said that it's easier to make colour look good, but harder to make it service a story. And he's probably right, but let's try and prove him wrong.
This is likely a test shot. There are a lot of things that make this composition unpersuasive. This composition is definitely more pleasing than the last, but something's still not quite right. So she alters the angle, asks one of the children to come back in, and you can see the woman easing up. But the older child looks a bit awkward, and the post is blocking part of the baby's head, so Lang tries again. This time, having the great idea to include the trunk at an angle in the foreground with the empty pie tin, compelling imagery of the family's struggle and nomadic lifestyle. But Lang thought she could do one better. By the time she arrives here, she knows exactly what the focus needs to be. The daughter's faces turned behind their mother's shoulders communicates that message of family, a family of the right size, mind you, without taking away from the central face or the eyes, which seem at last to let down their guard as they search the distance in worry. The face is so important that Lang has the woman put her hand on her chin so that her arm points to it. It's a technique that she's used before. Anything that took attention away from the face would hurt the power of the image, which also explains why Lang had a darkroom assistant remove the woman's other thumb here, where she was holding the post, so that she could keep her other hand to her chin. All this manipulation, of course, speaks to the fact that there's very little spontaneous in this iconic image of so-called documentary photography. It's supposed to communicate a candid truth about the moment, but this is anything but candid. Whether that diminishes its power is up to you. For me, being able to actually see the steps of Lang's craft enhances her work. It gives the photograph a third dimension. Almost as soon as it was developed, this photo...
Ready? Okay. So there's two techniques combined that I want to bring up today. The first is shooting important story moments in profile. The second is doing that with a telephoto lens. So normally you shoot an actor, you want to see their face. If you bring the camera around to the front, it's generally a better way for us to empathize or to see their emotions. If you play something off the profile of someone's face, it's a little bit stranger. It has a starkness to it, like this. Now, here's the weird part. You throw on a telephoto lens, and that compresses space. We do it all the time in movies for close-ups. It's more flattering, and it blows out the background. You get this nice little bokeh. But when you do it in profile, it's not really a beauty shot. It hides something. Add a little camera operator shake, and it's like we can barely keep up. It puts us slightly further away from the characters. It reminds us that we don't know everything in the story, that a lot is hidden from us, or it's far away and it's hazy to see. It turns us into witnesses who can't do anything about it. But once we do see it, we know what we saw.
The ring has awoken. It's heard its master's call.
There's always two levels to every piece of exposition, the information itself and how the character feels about it, or its importance to the main story. Getting across that second level is important, especially in fantasy when info is often obscure. Now, you can write it into the dialogue itself.
The hyperdrive generator's gone, Master. We'll need a new one.
That'll complicate things.
Or, if you have Ian McKellen, you can just cut to an extreme close-up.
The ring has awoken. It's heard its master's call.
It's McKellen's eyes that are communicating the gravity of the situation. It's something beyond worry, beyond concern, beyond even fear. Gandalf, widening his eyes but glazing them over, looks crazed, desperate, like the very possibility of Sauron obtaining the ring threatens to paralyze him with hopelessness. McKellen dials in the look just right, and in doing so establishes the stakes for the entire trilogy. What's even more impressive is how he builds to this wild look all across the first part of the movie, carrying the audience through the stages of unease, gradually trapping us inside Gandalf's mind so that his agitation is ours too. Again and again, Peter Jackson turns to McKellen to guide us, to bring us deeper into the story and the peril. It's a great gift for a director to have an actor whose reaction shots say just as much as his dialogue, sometimes more.
I will take it!
It's the simple act of Gandalf shutting his eyes that brings it home for me. The emotion is almost indescribable, a mix of love, fear, resignation, pride. Really, putting it into words defeats the purpose. It's all the significance of that choice in a look. Looking back across the series, I was amazed by the range of expression in McKellen's eyes. It's not the only tool in his toolbox, and it's not the only thing that makes these films work so well. But that range expands and deepens the emotional universe of the story. To appreciate how hard this is, I invite you to try replicating some of Gandalf's faces in the mirror. See if you can key into that same conviction that McKellen does. See if you can make your eyes literally travel as Gandalf's do when he describes the afterlife to Pippin.
And then you see it.
What? Gandalf. See what?
White shores. And beyond. green country into a swift sunrise.
To fit better in moments of tension and uncertainty, when things aren't as they should be. It's no coincidence that a movie with many great Dutch angles is called Doubt.
I like the way they make you feel. There's been a bit of controversy about them as people feel that they call too much attention to themselves. But actually, I just watch other movies that are filled with Dutch angles and you don't realize it because they use them so much it doesn't particularly mean anything.
The Dutch angle exploded in the 90s and early 2000s, appearing just about everywhere, from action movies to soap commercials. Maybe the perfect use of the Dutch angle comes in The Third Man, an incredible noir about the black market in post-World War II Vienna. The landscape of Vienna is the German expressionist vision come to life, with its jarring angles and ruined landscape. In The Third Man, the camera itself acts as another tilt in the already crooked world of post-World War II Vienna. And sometimes the camera doesn't even need to tilt because the street does it by itself. Within the frame, lines of all sorts of angles add to the angle created from the camera tilt. The Dutch angle contributes to the distortion already on screen, giving cinema a way of adding uncertainty that no other art form can do. Not in theater and not in the novel. But the crooked angles do more than enhance the landscape. During Holly's questioning of each witness, the crooked angles make their confessions feel a bit off and remind you never to be quite sure who to believe. The kind of Dutch angles I enjoy seem to be the ones that stay true to where the shot came from. The angle shows off what makes filmmaking unique through its emotional manipulation of a scene. So while the movie doesn't have explicit camera tilts, the tilting of the set and the tilting of the narrative introduces the idea that movies can be hyper-realistic and more than filming traditional set pieces. Movies can be subjective. I'm not trying to say that there's some obvious way to use the Dutch angle. It's a very emotional shot. You may enjoy how it feels in movies that I don't, and we're both right. Or you could say I'm looking too far into the shot and the Dutch angle is just a way to tilt the camera to make a scene interesting. But I think if you look more closely, you can see how the shot means quite a lot. The shot in many ways represents the original intent of directors to use filmmaking as a unique art form. The tilting of the camera is the purest form of subjective filmmaking. The unease of the Dutch angle makes cinema special because you can't do it in theater or the novel. And when it's used, it pushes boundaries for what movies are capable of.
And then, out in back of these same apartment buildings were these German expressionistic alleys.
And they also have the experimentation.
Producers came in and said, look, you also got to shoot it foursquare in case this doesn't work, which I certainly couldn't blame them for doing. But I ended up liking it very much. I even put it in cinematic history.
It's famous for its bizarre look, but the shot also teaches us a lot about filmmaking. It shows the different kind of lenses and how to use them, it enhances the emotion of a scene, and it can be used in subtle places you may not have even noticed. Let's see how. The shot is essentially an optical illusion, caused by zooming in or out on the camera lens while tracking the camera forward or backward. The result is the foreground stays in the same position while the background appears to squeeze or stretch, depending on which direction you go. It actually teaches an important principle of filming, camera lens. If you ever wanted to see the difference between wide-angle and telephoto lenses, a simplified example would be to observe a dolly zoom. Compare how it begins to how it ends. The dolly zoom shot can start like a telephoto lens, where the camera is far away and the focal length is bigger. There's less background in sight because the lens concentrates on a smaller portion of it. But when you change focal length by zooming out while also pushing the camera forward, you can observe more of the background while keeping the foreground in the same place. The result is filming the same thing, but the camera expands to see more of the background. The change in focal length takes in a wider area, so you go from a telephoto shot to a wide-angle shot. The dolly zoom captures the transition from one kind of lens shot to the other, and it leads to different emotional responses for the viewer. In Goodfellas, the diner scene becomes all the more confusing as the landscape shifts around them in impossible ways. Just as Henry's world is crushing and his paranoia grows, the impossible movement of the diner shows just how disoriented he feels. The zoom makes the world literally close in around him as getting caught seems almost inevitable. I particularly enjoy its use in The Lord of the Rings because the widening of the holes in the trees gives the visual feeling that the forest is opening up a portal for the enemy to come. You generally use telephoto in close-ups to keep attention on the foreground. When you move the camera around while using a telephoto lens, the background whips quickly behind the foreground because the camera takes in less of the background. It makes for some pretty cool shots. Wide angle takes in more of the background, so it's better for outdoor shots when you want to capture the landscape, or the wide angle lens makes people look a bit off. With the famous dolly zoom in Jaws, the shot shifts to a wide angle look, which makes his face look just a bit more stretched and unnatural, and it unconsciously adds to the rest of the freakiness of the shot. Alfred Hitchcock used it for depth, Scorsese used it to show paranoia, and Brad Bird used it for visual cues. So be on the lookout for it. Thanks for watching.
Fashion is not the primary thing, the primary effort in motion pictures is to tell the story.
That's the definition of good costuming.
Yeah.
That it's the most appropriate. That's the most appropriate thing for the character to be wearing in any scene.
Behind every memorable character is a memorable costume, and behind every costume is a costume designer. Their job is to create a look for each character that serves the needs of the story, sometimes to make a character stand out from the crowd, sometimes to blend into one, but always to make sure that they're clothed in the appropriate attire.
Costume design provides an amazing opportunity to give us insight into a character and the world around them. Because just like in the real world, what you wear says a lot about you. At its best, costume design is a vital layer of world building, and it works well in totally foreign places. When people talk about the original Star Wars, they usually praise the plot, characters, or special effects, but the costume design was also fantastic. It combines what we're used to seeing with the completely alien. Princess Leia's costume design is right in the middle of looking like she's from a foreign planet and looking like royalty as we understand it. In all the designs, the robots, generals, and soldiers, their wardrobe is alien enough to transport us to an exciting and different world, but familiar enough to keep us grounded in what we already understand.
As a costume designer, sometimes we're more like psychologists, figuring out our characters, where they would shop, what kind of clothes they would wear, how messy or neat they were, where their station in life. And basically, we set the time and the place with our costumes.
Deciding on what would make for the most appropriate outfit requires a deep understanding of character and story.
Mom always said there's an awful lot you can tell about a person by their shoes.
The main things that I want to be very sure and explain to you, that fashion is not the primary thing, the primary effort in motion pictures is to tell the story.
Color can be used to subtly imply a character's pride in their heritage and subsequent journey to a new country, or how it can show us that a character has fallen in love, or to show us that a character has fallen out of it. A costume can show us a character following in his father's footsteps, a character's descent into a criminal underworld where moral lines become increasingly blurred, or foreshadow a character's affinity for pretty things.
There is something about him that is slightly vain, that little neckerchief that he wears. So again, it comes back to starting to let the audience know.
Costumes give us insight into the character wearing it. Luke Skywalker's wardrobe has the visual aesthetic of martial arts gear, implying he's undergoing training. Obi-Wan Kenobi is dressed like a monk because he's doing the teaching. In The Force Awakens, the roles have reversed, and so have the costume choices. New teacher, new student.
I think the most important thing to realize about costume design is that everything you see a character wearing, from the lead actors to the background extras, is designed.
Nothing is random. Everything in the frame is designed to tell one story. All of these clothes are manufactured. Okay, designed and manufactured. Why? Fight Club. So many fights, right?
You could not just buy a piece, you had to have
doubles, triples, quadruples, right?
This is the thing most people also don't realize, that the clothes don't deteriorate through the course of making a movie. Every scene in which they're deteriorated is a separate piece.
Tyler Durden's costume design in Fight Club always contrasts the color palette of the setting and other characters, almost like he isn't supposed to be there in the first place. Along with actor personality and direction, color scheme in costume design is an impressive and effective way to make a character stand out or blend in.
The reason that everything is designed is because in film, everything matters.
With a camera, you can zoom in and get close to every single part of the human body. And you can tell if a shirt has been pressed or not pressed. You can tell if shoes are cared for or neglected. You know, all of these little things that help give the audience clues about who the character is.
In 500 Days of Summer, the opening title sequence establishes the wardrobe color for the two characters, brown for Tom and blue for Summer. Throughout the movie, the coloring shifts around them. When Summer enters Tom's world, the setting is colored brown, while Summer's world is blue. The dance sequence has all the actors dressed in blue to represent Tom thinking about Summer. Costume coloring gives us mental cues as to how the story is progressing, and by the end of the movie, we realize their colors don't mix and they part ways.
For each character to feel believable, you have to consider everything about that character when designing their wardrobe. Where they're from, their financial situation, how fashionably conscious they are. Costumes help to tell us something about a character and the world they inhabit. They aid the actor in the transformation process and help them to deliver their best performance. They become important pieces of iconography surrounding any classic character whose outfit is often the most recognizable part about that character.
The costumes that stick in your mind are the ones that the character has inhabited and the character has really come alive in, and that's why you remember them. That's the goal, I think.
Along a central ridge detail. Their costumes are as connected as their plot lines are for most of the show. And while some of the details can get lost in the show's dark motif, if you look closely, you'll see how much their parallel outfits mirror their struggles for power and identity. Take a look at Cersei's outfit here at King's Landing in Season 1.
Now the entire North has risen up against us.
I tried to stop it.
Did you? You failed.
Like this turquoise dress she wears while watching her daughter Myrcella being sent away to Dorne. Cersei's pastels play against her Lannister red dresses to contrast her moments of power.
Seize him. Cut his throat. Oh, wait. I've changed my mind. Let him go.
Around the same time, Sansa was a hostage of the crown at the mercy of the Lannisters, wearing dresses that mirrored her captor Cersei. The oversized passed-down hand-me-downs do the same thing for her that they did for Cersei, reflect her lack of power. In Season 4, as the two characters diverge, with Cersei vying for power behind the throne and Sansa grappling with her identity, those signature colors begin to disappear. Sansa's transformation happens after Petyr Baelish rescues her from King's Landing, and her new circumstances prompt a dress so important we see her making it. As Cersei and Sansa begin to reassert their power around Season 6, their gowns become increasingly stiff and severe, and house loyalty returns to their costuming with a vengeance. With no further use for the survival camouflage of feminine queen or splendid queen mother, Cersei's gowns echo Lannister armor, with high-neck silhouettes and forbidding fabrics and defensive details like epaulets, reminders of the family's military might. And by the time Sansa's back in Winterfell on her own terms in Season 7, her wardrobe is high-neck silhouettes and forbidding fabrics. The epaulets and signature necklace echo Stark armor, while feathers represent her time with Baelish, reflecting the Stark family's prestige and the cunning she uses to govern the North.
That's disappointing.
Despite the diverging plot lines as both of them enter the final battle, their costumes show their similarities, rather than emphasize their differences. In the end, they stand on opposite sides, with their costumes clearly echoing each other. And as the show draws to a close, it's safe to say
one of the most important characters in a movie oftentimes is actually the setting where the movie takes place. In the same way that a character has a personality, influences the plot, or represents a certain idea, so too can a setting just as effectively contribute to the mood, style, or themes in a story. A setting is wherever a scene takes place and can be anywhere from space to a desert to virtual reality. In Lost in Translation, Charlotte and Bob feel confused and out of place in Tokyo, and the setting reinforces how they feel out of touch with their significant others. As they grow closer and understand how to cope with their fears and problems, the portrayal of Tokyo goes from dark and confusing close-ups at the beginning to clear, bright, wide shots at the end. The setting showcased their growth as characters. A setting can also be a strong symbol in the movie.
Ah, the West. Mythical home of Roadrunner, John Wayne, and families in wagons, heading for a fresh start on the rugged frontier. Wide open sky and these big red rock formations make up its stereotypical backdrop, the one in movies and cartoons.
Well, there's gotta be a phone or a gas station around here somewhere, honey.
But when you look at a bunch of those movies back to back, you start to notice something. This image of the West kinda looks the same whenever we see it. And that's because this specific group of formations is unique to one place, Monument Valley. So how did this one area become a symbol of the American West? Stagecoach, directed by John Ford and shot primarily on location in Monument Valley, revolutionized the Western. Stagecoach mainstreamed the Western, and it's here that audiences began to associate Monument Valley with the mythic American West, an epic, isolated landscape full of potential, the kind of place where outlaws and outcasts could find a fresh start. This backdrop could be anywhere in the West.
Characters can never truly remove themselves from setting, and setting continuously gets used to advance the story forward. Not every setting has a higher meaning, but just about each one sets a certain mood for a scene.
Movies become classics when all of their production elements come together to make something great, and that includes costuming. So when you look back at your favorite characters, think about what they're wearing. And of course, remember the most important rule of costume design.
No capes!
Thanks for watching.